Good evening, everyone. We are back again after discussing the Mendelian laws. I'm back again to discuss the genetic disorders. So we are here to understand which of these diseases or the disorders are inherited, which one are not inherited. But to start with, we need to understand the definition of genetic disorders. So we are going to look at different disorders, but in this slide it shows much of Mendelian disorders. We are going to describe each one of them when the right time comes for their classification. So this is generally the Mendelian disorders, but they are classified based on a certain Mendelian pattern. So genetic disorder, they're describing it as an illness which are caused by one or more abnormalities at the level of genome, especially when the condition is present at the point when the child is born. So we talk about congenital. So most of those genetic disorders, they always occur at the point of birth. But then they can either be inherited or not. So when they are passed down the line from the parents to the offsprings, then definitely we talk about them being heritable. So the non-heritable ones are caused much by mutations at the DNA level. So whatever can cause the DNA sequence to change, that is a mutation. But remember, by the time you are introducing genetics, we defined much that organization. We are understanding much of organization. Organization, what we meant was, at the DNA, you talk about the gene, you talk about the chromosome, so it's like a hierarchy. So the DNA is hosted in the gene. The gene is hosted on the chromosome. So the changes on the DNA will bring a lot of impact on the gene, and ultimately will also bring a lot of impact on the chromosome. So that is how it goes. So for the non-heritable disorders, it relates much with mutation being a huge contributing factor to such. So the defect will only be heritable if the genetic disorder is passed in the germline, or it occurs in the germline. If it passed by the parents to the offsprings, then we talk about it being heritable. But their classification of genetic disorders, we either have the single gene disorder, which is also known as a Mendelian disorder, and secondly, the chromosomal genetic disorders. And the chromosomal genetic disorders, they are the ones which contribute much, their contributions. So you'll find that the defect at the level of the DNA will cause the disorder. So they are always known much at the chromosomal disorders, because you'll find there is a deletion or an addition of a chromosome. Then at that level, we are talking much about mutations. So the chromosomal genetic disorders are contributed much by mutations, but the single gene disorders or Mendelian disorders, those are the heritable ones. Studies has given us a solid foundation in understanding the single gene disorders in humans. So when you can pinpoint a specific gene or a certain gene to be the cause of a disease in a pedigree or along the germline, then you'll be able to say that that is single gene disorder or Mendelian disorder. So we refer to them as single gene because you can pinpoint a gene which is responsible for a disorder or for a certain disease in the family line or the germline. So at that point, it is known as Mendelian or single gene disorders. So for these Mendelian disorders, there is transmission pattern, and the transmission pattern is simple. It either affects the autosomes or the sex chromosomes. Remember, when we're doing chromosomes, by now you know what autosomes are and what sex chromosomes are. So if it affects the X and Y's, then it is sex-linked. It affects the other chromosomes apart from the sex chromosomes. You talk about the autosomal disorder. Then as much as it relates to the autosomes or the sex chromosomes, the disorder can either be dominant or recessive, the allele for the disease. If the allele responsible for the disease is dominant, it means, and it relates to the autosomes, you are going to discuss the pattern as autosomal dominant disorders. If the allele for the disease is recessive, but it's still related with autosomes, you are going to talk about autosomal recessive disorders. If the allele for the disease is recessive, but it touches the sex chromosomes, you are going to talk about the X-linked recessive disorder. If it touches the sex chromosome, specifically the X, but the allele for the disease is dominant, you talk about the X-linked dominant disorders. The Y is not touched. Whatever touches Y brings about infertility. So even if you are putting the allele for the disease, don't put on Y for the sex-linked disorders. So that is how the pattern for mention is. So it's either autosomal or sex chromosomes, and then it's either the allele for the disease is dominant or it is recessive. So by combining the chromosome and the allele responsible for the disease with a dominant or recessive, then we have those inheritance patterns as autosomal recessive, autosomal dominant, X-linked recessive, and X-linked dominant. And this information or this knowledge is always very important for genetic counseling, and this always helps for the couples who want to get married. So they have to do the genetic testing, and at last, if the outcome is positive or there is any of the couple who have the allele for any of the diseases, then definitely they have to be counseled to know of the outcome, the possibility, so they get prepared. Even for the people who are already married, this can also help much. To know much about this can help much in genetics.